Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man Podcast. My name's Rory Paquette, and I know, I know you know that, but I just like to remind myself how grateful I am to be sitting in this chair every single time I start one of these shows. Folks, if you're not out there doing what you're doing, liking, sharing, subscribing, sending me all those DMs and, razzing me about all the little mistakes I make on the show, then you know what? I can't sit here and do what I'm doing. So I thank you all from the bottom of my heart, and I'm eternally grateful so that I get to do what I do on a daily basis. Folks, you all know what time it is. We got to pay a couple of bills. So let's take a quick break and take a sip of our preferred beverage in my IU celebratory mug. That's right. It's on today. It's back. Man, if you're a friend of the program, and I know you are, you know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill Coffee. At Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram, go look them up and check them out. Deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful. Just like my wife. They brew a mean cup of joe. It's an absolutely fantastic cup of coffee. And they do all the right things for all the right reasons, folks. They support veterans, which you all know is incredibly important to us here at Power Man. If you're a veteran out there, I want to thank you and your family for all of the sacrifices you've made. Because, boy, I tell you what, if you hadn't gone and done what you did, I wouldn't be able to have an opinion anymore in today's world. So, and I know because they've tried to shut me down. We love you folks, and we're glad you found a home here at the Power Man Podcast. Very important to us, and you're important to Freedom Hill Coffee. So look them up, check them out at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. Tell them Power Man sent you. Let me get one more sip of this so I can keep up with this young buck on the other side of the table from me who's getting ready to just explode. All right, here we go. Cannot wait to hear this story. And when I heard the name of this gentleman's podcast, I did a double take. I said, wait, what? But I tell you what, it's excellent. And so is he. So please welcome to the show. He's the co-host of the Dead Dads Podcast. You heard that right. The Dead Dads Podcast. Please welcome to the show, Roger Nairn. Roger, how you doing,
Thanks.
brother?
Fantastic, Rory. Thanks so much. First of all, who's calling you out for making mistakes on your show? How dare they?
Oh, yeah, everybody, it's great, man. I don't edit. And so for years on all my podcasts, all my folks like they DM me every time I make a mistake because I leave it
Yeah.
in there.
But isn't that, I mean, that is the great thing about podcasts is that we do have that relationship with our audience where they can reach out and you do listen to them. You
Oh yeah.
can't, you can't do that with network TV.
No, no, no. I love it. I love it. And I know that you love it too. I mean, you're in the podcast space here, with what you
Hmm.
do. Tell
Absolutely.
everybody a little bit about who is Roger. Who is Roger? How did you get into this podcast, life that you're in? And we'll get into the podcast, brother.
Yeah, so I grew up in Canada. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I was always in the advertising world and the marketing world. I came from 20 plus years working for big sort of madman style agencies. Absolutely loved what I was doing. Started to fall out of love with the actual marketing world though. So instead, I fell into love with a new passion, which was podcasting, and actually started my own essentially advertising agency. Only we just make podcasts. We're called Jar Podcast Solutions. Now, as you grow a business, you get bigger and bigger. You start to do less of the fun stuff. You start doing less of the thing that got you into the business in the first place. And I love what I do, but I have been itching to do a podcast for a very long time, and it wasn't until my dad died that I finally got a chance to do it. Scott, my partner, and I started the Dead Dads podcast.
Okay, and this is your co-host Scott Cunningham, and he does
Absolutely,
this with you.
he
You
does.
guys have a really good chemistry between the two of you. I mean, you play off
Thank
each
you.
other well, and
Appreciate
and
it.
I've enjoyed listening to some of your episodes. The was the loss of your dad recent? Is that what
You know,
happened?
it was just over 2 years ago. For Scott, it's just over 3 years ago.
Gotcha.
We were out one day, and we have kids that play together, and we were sitting there watching our kids do parkour. And I started telling him story. He was asking me how I'm doing with my dad, which first of all is I just love the fact that he checks in like that. And I started telling him a story, and the story was that when my dad passed away, we had known it was coming. He had had cancer for 5 years. When he passed, though, it was right around Christmas, December 23rd, and he had to essentially be shipped from the hospital to the funeral home, and he sat there for a while. Fast forward to just before New Year's, we were going to cremate him. When you have a body cremated, a lot of times you need to go witness the body first. Now, of course, a funeral home would never just let you witness the body. You got to do the whole casket. You got to get them all dressed up. You got to do the whole chapel thing. And that's, of course we wanted to do that. So fast forward to when we went to go view my dad, the funeral director, God bless him, pulls me into this side room with my mom and my sister and kind of calmly sits us down. I'll never forget, his name is Jesse. And he says, I'm a big believer in this industry of honesty, and I want to be as honest with you as possible. You see, while we've had your dad, Ken, in our custody, and then he paused, he said, he's had a bit of a fall. And then he pauses again, and we kind of panic and look at it across the table at each other. And then he goes, he's totally fine, though. He's totally fine. Well, we went to go see him. He looked amazing. That part of it was, we walk out of the funeral chapel and get to the car, and I just burst out laughing because, first of all, he's not fine. He's very dead.
Right.
But also, when you say he's fine, I immediately started thinking, like, is he though? Like, does he got a dent? Is his nose missing? Like, what happened? The reality is, like, he didn't even need to tell us at all. In fact, it's kind of the equivalent of me cooking Thanksgiving turkey, and about 8 hours before we get to the dinner table, I drop the turkey on the floor. Now, do I need to announce that to the entire table as we're eating? No, it's a safe little white lie that we can get away with.
There you
So,
go.
anyways, I'm telling Scott this story. He tells me his story, which is that when his dad passed, they went to go clean out his garage, and he had 3 leaf blowers, but no lawn. He had 3 lawnmowers, but no lawn. And so, anyways, we're sort of having these conversations, but at the same time, we're talking about what's working, what isn't, and how our grief is. And I finally just blurted out and said, "This has got to be a podcast." And of course, we jump right into it. And the Dead Dads podcast is now what it is today.
All right. So let me just make sure I'm clarifying this for the audience. They dropped your dad.
They dropped my dad. They never really went into, we didn't really like poke around and dig. It sounds as if at some point during the custody of him, they dropped him on the floor, and he was perfectly fine. But God bless this funeral director. He just felt like he had to be honest, and he had to tell us, which, you can't fault him for that. But at the same
Right.
time, I would have been okay if that one slipped.
Yeah, right. Now, the 3 lawnmower and the 3 leaf blowers with no yard. Did we ever get an explanation of that? Because now I got to know.
He was a bit of a hoarder. He was a bit of a collector. He liked,
Okay.
he also, he was a mechanic. He liked mechanical things. So he liked to, apparently he also collected, like you remember those old coffee makers that would sort of bolt underneath your cabinets?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like really great. So he had like a handful of those, but never used them, never took them out of the box. So I think it was a blend of a little bit of hoarding, but also just the appreciation for mechanical things. It, it was as simple as that, actually, but it was actually more just the humor side of it, of now you got to clean out your dad's stuff, and you're now literally unpacking all these little quirks about him that he's gone.
I tell
I
you,
think ultimately, though, the thing that what we really zeroed in on was, hey, we're now talking about grief with each other. We're now talking about death with each other. We happen to be doing it through some funny stories, but at the same time, like, these are not typically conversations that guys are having with each other. And that was the piece that we really kind of tapped into, was like, I had no real resources for me, and I really had nobody having these types of conversations with me in advance of my dad dying and post him dying. And that was the piece that we both kind of went, huh, like, this feels like something that guys need more of. And so that's really where we wanted to sort of fill that gap.
right. Wow. Let me, on a serious note, just say, hey, I'm very sorry for your loss. To both of you.
I appreciate it.
But the you bring up some very, very valid and interesting points here. Our audience is 90% men. And of that, 75% of those guys are fathers and husbands.
Mm-hmm.
One or the other or both. And so, I have had a lot of conversations with men in our groups and things like that about grief, about how we handle these sort of things, how we handle events like funerals, losing loved
Mm-hmm.
ones. The common response really is to internalize shutdown.
Yep.
And humor is just so frowned upon by anyone who's not male. is what we kind of find. Like, the wives and the moms and, the people outside, they
Yeah,
don't like the humor,
not as
but the
much.
brothers, the sons, the dads, that we all just kind of get, you gotta like sort of let this out somehow. I'm not
Exactly.
going to go cry.
No.
How do I let it out? So
Yeah.
you have a lot of belief on this topic. I'd love to have you expound on that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, there is something so cathartic about, laughing about it. And I think part of it is actually existential in the sense that you are literally laughing in the face of death. And I think that's something that we, you know, can all have a little bit of in our lives. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fear death. That's not necessarily fully rational, but I think there is a level of, lightness that we should be applying to it. And I say all this while saying I'm still figuring all this out myself. So I'm not saying that I have like totally nailed grief and I figured out like the perfect recipe, because the other thing is that everybody's grief is different. So, you might cry and that's okay. That's awesome. That is something that is going to work for you, and you're going to get out a lot of the emotion, and you're going to get a lot of the the that sort of negative energy out of you in that moment. Others might, just get really mad and scream and yell, and that's also okay. Others crack jokes and have, a moment of levity, and then some of us have like all of that. I had a ton of grief. Sorry, I had a ton of guilt when my dad died. My dad had cancer for 5 years, so I think I had a long time to really sort of process things, and then when he finally did pass, I actually felt quite neutral in a way. Like and I'm not saying I wasn't sad, but
Sure.
it felt like all the grief had been done in advance. And so when he did actually finally pass, and I felt neutral, I felt really guilty about feeling neutral. I thought I was supposed to have the sort of movie version of grief where you're wailing and crying and standing over a bridge and looking off into the distance and wondering, will I ever see him again? And it just wasn't happening, right? I was very neutral, and I just sort of went, I didn't go ahead with my business, but I just sort of started jumping into a lot of tasks and doing a lot of things. And then nothing really was coming to me from an emotional standpoint. And I actually felt super guilty about that. And it wasn't until I went and talked to a counselor, actually, and she told me, listen, that's your way of grieving. And your way of grieving is different than everybody else's.
Well,
And that's something you need to embrace, is that this is your way. And as soon as I started to embrace that, I really kind of kind of got in the groove of my grief, which is an odd thing to say, but it's true because
yeah,
it doesn't really go away. It never really goes away.
right.
But I do think that your way of sort of living with it and dancing with it does.
Interesting. I appreciate your viewpoint on it. Now you created the Dead Dads podcast, okay? And I get the why behind you and Scott
Mhm.
and why you wanted to do it. I guess I want to make sure that I understand the purpose behind you guys doing it and what is it you hope to accomplish with the listeners of a
Yeah,
podcast like that.
it's a great question. I mean, the biggest thing is that we don't want any guy out there to feel like he's alone in their grief.
Awesome.
And so the actual format of the show is Scott and I sitting down with another man. Now that man can either have just lost their father, which we've had, recently we had a guy on the show who only 2 months before had lost his dad, and literally the day before the interview that we did, he had come from the celebration of life, um, all the way to somebody whose dad died 20 years ago. And we talk about, first of all, we talk about the dad. We talk about what their relationship was like, and then we get into like what was the whole process like, because I think explaining kind of what it was like, what they went, how they were feeling, even sort of like some of the like in the weeds, like mechanics of death that happens, to just explain that
Hmm.
is, we don't really see a lot of that happening. And so in teasing that out through an interview, what we want to do is show men that they're not alone. And give them, other examples of guys that might be in the same situation as them, so they can sort of mirror that. But also show them a broad spectrum of different ways of looking at grief and managing their grief, because again, not everybody's going to have the same experience.
Right. So I guess the criteria for a guest on your show is just having lost your dad and being willing to talk about it.
That's a great question. So that was the original premise, and to date, that has been what we've what we've accomplished. I think we're also open eventually to get to the point where we'll interview somebody who's about to lose their dad.
Oof.
I know somebody who has essentially lost their dad. He's gone into sort of like a vegetative state, and for all intents and purposes, he's gone. However, he is still alive, and so I think that's just a really interesting scenario to explore and share. Um, we're also going to get into a bit more sort of resource sort of focused conversations. That's where you might see some more women being part of the conversation, whether that's perhaps a grief counselor or somebody who's experienced as like like there's like death doulas. Again, I'm from Canada, so we have like our medical assistants in dying in some provinces. I think that's just interesting to explore. That's actually how my dad died. Was he chose the day and the time, and it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever been a part of, to be honest. But I
Wow.
know that's quite a controversial, and I think that's worth exploring. So I think the evolution of the show is not set in stone by any means, and that's where like we want to hear from the audience. Like, what would you want to hear? What would you want to learn from? And we'll kind of go from there.
Interesting. Okay. The show now so far, have you only interviewed men who lost their dads
Correct.
so far? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought in looking through, the episode menu.
Yeah.
But you don't intend to keep it just men who've lost their dads then. You're talking about bringing on women in the same capacity.
So I think we would keep it as just men for our sort of long form interviews that we release every 2 weeks. But I think we would intersperse those weekly with some expert interviews
Hmm.
where we would perhaps bring an expert in grief psychology or a grief counselor, like I said, and some of those may be women. And then I think there will be other scenarios where perhaps I could see us interviewing a guy and perhaps his spouse or partner or wife and having them and talking about the dynamics of what what his dad's death, how that impacted their relationship, for example. I think is really interesting to explore. So there's a number of different scenarios.
Yeah, it's interesting the perspective that you take on the podcast because you do talk about grief, but
Mm.
it doesn't strike me as a grief podcast where like that's all you talk about and that's sort of the focus. You cover
Phew.
so many other issues. Yeah, I want to make sure that's being put out there too.
No, I
So
appreciate that.
people aren't thinking this is just a grief podcast. If you need that, then those are
Yeah.
great. But if you want some other stuff, you offer that. So
Well, and
how do you balance that? Yeah.
I think this is one of the things that we learned ourselves and very quickly learned is an untapped sort of opportunity, let's call it. Is there are other things that go along with death, something that we all are impacted by. As Scott once said in our very first ever interview, it feels like more people are dying than ever. I was like, yeah, that's probably true. And it'll probably keep happening.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and that can include, sort of the legal and estate side of it. There's the all the paperwork that comes from after somebody passes away, and then there's just like the transitions in life, whether that's helping a mother or a spouse move out of their current home and into like some sort of a downsized situation, all the way to your dad has now died. You're now essentially the next one left in the family. What are you going to do about that? And how does that, how do you feel about that? But also, there's other scenarios like, not only do you as a son need to now cope with the fact that in some cases, your hero has just died, and you're now dealing with your grief, but you've also perhaps got, kids who now just lost their grandfather, and you've got a wife who just lost their father-in-law. So how are you also going to be there for them as well, while also managing your grief? And so there's
Right.
just a really sort of a plethora of different, scenarios and things that happen. I think also and I want to be really clear that not everybody's relationship with their dad was perfect.
Right.
I get that. And so we want to first of all acknowledge that the show is not for every perfect father-son relationship. Some people never met their father. Some had really crappy relationships with their dad. Some had perfect relationships with their dad. And so everybody's going to come into their grief their own way, and a big piece of that is what that relationship's going to look like in the first place.
That's interesting, that you're offering sort of a variety of angles on, what unfortunately and inevitably happens for all of us. At some point, our dads die,
Yeah.
and we have to deal with it, depending on whatever the dynamic might be at that moment. So,
And sometimes it's sudden and you had no idea it was going to happen.
right.
And sometimes you see it and are prepared for it 5 years down the road. I think though the the impact that has on men, which I think is different than the impact it has on losing your mom. That's a whole other podcast, you
Yeah,
know?
it is.
It's just you have like inevitably, like innately, we have a different relationship with our dad than we do with our moms, and
Right.
losing that is, in some cases, just a completely earth-shattering moment, and then in others, it's not, and or maybe it's opened up all sorts of questions and mysteries, and there's a number of things that come to mind. I, at the end of the day, though, we just want to acknowledge that guys aren't alone in this. They have at least us to support them in, at least sharing, our experiences and I don't want to say knowledge because we are not therapists and we are not doctors. So I think it's very important to recognize that. All we're doing is facilitating conversations and giving people an opportunity to listen in and take from it what they can.
That's a place I was just thinking of going to as I was listening to you. You and your partner are not professionals in this way. You're not grief counselors and
I
that
can
type of
barely
thing.
put on a pair of pants.
So, but it sounds as though most of what you guys talk about really just comes from your own lived experience in
Yep.
this particular situation. Am I picking that up?
Yeah, you're definitely picking that up. And also, what we are good at is having conversations with people. And I think what we have, committed to doing is bringing out other people's stories. And so, if we can help facilitate that, that's our goal. And then spread that as far and wide as possible, so that it gets into as many of eyes and ears as of men, and in some cases women, as possible. It's an interesting sort of strategy that we're kind of playing around with, because there's obviously the sort of like create the content around it so that it is attracting men, right? That seems like the sort of the given. There's also sort of this sort of like interesting strategy of like, maybe we should be attracting women, and we should be attracting like women to this content so that they say, hey honey, you've really been struggling lately,
Hmm.
check this out, sort of thing. So it's yeah, it's sort of just a interesting sort of thing we're considering.
Got it. I mean, you do this for a living for companies. So,
I do.
I mean, this should be a piece of cake for you and Scott to figure this
Oh,
out, right?
dude, it's not though. It's not. And so I should come clean and say yes. I own a company that makes podcasts. However, I have committed to not bug my team too much to help make this. In fact, I'm using this podcast also as an opportunity for me to teach myself a lot of stuff that I haven't been able to learn. For example, like video podcasting. I grew up with audio podcasting.
Hmm.
And so just learning YouTube and the YouTube algorithm and the that whole world is literally a world. And my team does not have time, nor do they have the energy to work with me on a podcast, one on one, for a sort of a passion project. And so I've just really really enjoyed being in the education seat, to be honest. It's hard though when it comes to the at least the video podcast side of it. It's not easy.
Well, you appear to be doing a pretty good job of figuring it out, the two of
Appreciate
you.
it.
So,
I
yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
it.
I'm sure you'll get there. Um, with this being primarily based on your own personal experience, yours and Scott's, um, when your father passed away, was there, one thing or maybe a couple of things that were just like, wow, I had no idea this was something I had to deal with, or I was totally unprepared for this. I'm curious because so many men just go into it. We shut down and we go, we're going to handle whatever it is. I'm just going to plow through, and we don't really give credence to something that might be harder than something else. We just handle it. We run it
Yeah,
over, right? I'm curious about that. You and I talked about a couple of points beforehand, and I wonder what really hit you, Roger, when this happened.
totally. Well, I'll say, and I mentioned it earlier that the guilt side of it definitely hit me the hardest that I didn't expect.
Okay.
And maybe, maybe that was a little bit unique because I did sort of know my dad was coming in advance, and also, he chose his date and time, and so there was a setup to it. The piece that really knocked me out or was just the amount of paperwork and sort of logistical untangling that has to happen. In fact, I now consider this to be like a new war crime, which is just how difficult these, utility companies turns out, they're members of the Fruit of the Month Club or something. You know what I mean? Like, you don't realize it. First of all, there's just a lot of loose ends, but also tightly not sort of rat nest, connections to these subscriptions and stuff like that. And untangling from them, they do not make it easy. Um, I'll give you a perfect example. All my mom wanted to do was take my dad's name out of her phone contract, their phone contract. They're both their names were on it. So it was, Ken and Joanne, and she just wanted it to be Joanne. And anyways, the process involved deleting her account entirely, resubscribing her. In doing so, she now had to pay double the price of what she was paying before
There you
because
go.
it's a new contract. And then on top of that, because they tried to like fiddle around, they completely deleted her email address and she lost all her emails. They described it as like, oh, it's an old system and da 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 da. It's like, you're like this like futuristic, telecom company, and you're multi billionaire. Anyways, I am on a mission to one day, both on the Canada side and the American side, because I'm pretty sure you guys probably have to go through the same thing. I'm going to get legislation put in place where there's like a simple button that the funeral home presses that then contacts all the different. There's got to be like a registration. The death certificate, must like initiate something that just makes it easy. If you
Hmm.
can now pay your taxes on one sheet of paper, you can now untangle yourself from your membership to the gym. You know what I mean?
You would
It's
think.
just so it's
You would think.
and I think one of the things that we talk a lot about on the show is as uncomfortable as it is, it's good to have these conversations with your mom and dad in advance, and nobody wants to have them. It's super uncomfortable, especially if they're still healthy.
Mhm.
But you get past the age of 70, and the numbers start working against you. And we've even got a blog post on our site, to help you sort of have that conversation. But I think just knowing where, who's on this contract and who's on that contract, and what does the will look like, and who do I contact? And I know somebody who lost their mom, sorry, their mom first, and then their dad died. Not only did they not know who their lawyer, sorry, not only did they not know like where the will stuff was, but they also just didn't know like what lawyer to contact. There's no real, they just didn't have it written down anywhere. We had a guy on our show talk about how his dad was an accountant, but he was like one of those old school accountants that like still had things on like sticky pads and around his desk. And so like there was no system in place. The system
Right.
was all up here. He died on the toilet, so he's gone, right? And he just said, I really wish that we had sat down and did a spreadsheet, and we knew he had cancer, we knew he was going, but it just never happened. And it sounds kind of crass to figure that out in advance, and it sounds like you're actually just saving yourself a bunch of time, but actually, like, you're also grieving while it's happening. So like it's this extra crappy moment of like, not only do I have to feel really bad about my dad dying, but also or
Yeah.
being dead, I now also have to do like these super intense paperwork, and it sucks. It sucks.
Yeah. It's not the time to be forced into a position where you have to advocate for everything to try and like save your mom, because
Yeah,
this happened.
It's
It's
like
awful.
you're drowning and the telecom companies are throwing you a toaster, and they've got life jackets everywhere. It just
Exactly.
feels so unfair.
No, it's I talk to a lot of folks actually. I have several students who work in the widow community,
Hmm.
and I've heard all the stories, from these folks about when they got widowed and what every company out there tried to do to them. So
It should be illegal.
it really, I think it may be, to be
It
honest, in
probably
some of
is.
these
Yeah. Yeah.
cases. But yeah, it's horrendous. But if you can bring awareness to that, especially for men who don't want to have that conversation right now. There's a lot of guys listening right now that are going, man, this is rough, and all they want to know is, can I make jokes, at the funeral,
You,
and is it
you
okay?
can definitely make jokes at the funeral. And so it's really interesting. What we found is also you can make jokes before he's dead too, because in a lot of cases, we're hearing the most hilarious jokes that their dads are cracking as they're literally on their deathbed. It's so human, right? It's just
Yeah.
it's a way of connecting with each other. Um, the one of the guys on our show, and this episode hasn't been released yet, but he said, what's the one thing that's more heavier than my dad's casket? And I said, what? He says, the weight of my the weight of my unreached potential or something like that. It was essentially my dad. It was me not being able to live up to what my dad wanted me to be. Like that's
Hmm.
funny.
Ouch, that's painful too.
It's painful, of course. That's what good jokes are, is that they have a truth in it, right?
That 100% is going to be my youngest son when if I have the, privilege of sort of saying goodbye while I'm laying there, type of thing. And it doesn't just happen one night in my sleep, but
when
my
my dad
son
got
would be the
sent
one doing
whoops,
it.
when my dad got sent to the hospital to I think he was pretty sure things were going downhill. The paramedics were amazing, and I'll never forget him. He was out in the hallway. They had to get him into a room and stuff like that. And it was December 21st. Christmas was right around the corner. And I'll never forget, he's lying in the stretcher and he just looks up at the paramedic and he says, 5 o'clock. She just goes, what? It was 5 o'clock. And she's like, what does that mean? He says, that's the time we want you for Christmas dinner. Like, amazing, Not only is he thanking her for being great, but also, you're coming over for dinner, and it's, funny little way of lightening the mood.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah,
you kind of count on a dad for that,
you
in those
do.
moments, don't you? Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that everyone's dad was that. However, I was lucky enough to have that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do count on that. They do count on their dad to at least sort of lighten the mood when things are tense and scary.
Right.
Um, yeah, you're absolutely right. It feels like a natural thing for them to do is protect you right to the very end.
If you don't mind me asking, you mentioned that your father took part in the sort of planning his
Hmm.
his end, right? And
Yeah.
and yeah, I know that in Canada that's legal.
Hmm.
One of my students actually is a death doula,
Hmm.
and has written a book and is working on a podcast about it. But so I've got to learn a lot about this sort of thing. So I'm a little more
Hmm.
curious maybe than the average bear, on
Yeah.
this sort of deal.
Yeah.
Um, the You've mentioned a couple things that I just wanted to follow up on, and please feel free to just say pass if you don't want to answer, the
I'm
question.
not a pass guy.
All right, all right. Well, so here we go. All right.
Let's do it.
Um, One of the things that I've heard from people like, my student, is
Hmm.
that by scheduling it and sort
Hmm.
of you get to kind of take charge of it, you get to own it a little bit more. The family can get a little more peace and kind of planning for it. But then you mentioned, and maybe it's a guy thing. You mentioned that the guilt was sort of surprising, and that there was an awful lot of that with you, when this happened. Was it that the process didn't give you the closure you thought it was going to be, or did that come from some other area? And again, you don't have to talk about it, but I'm just
No, that's
curious
a great. No, it's a really
where
good
it went.
question. No, actually, I would say that's the opposite. That in planning his death and being there when he passed and holding his hand, and I was also there when he made the decision, which was like 100% sound mind. He had actually talked about it years before as well, so it's not like he saw a brochure as it was being brought into the emergency room. No, no, being there when it happened and seeing just how peaceful he was and how he got to say goodbye to everybody, which is something that not everybody gets to do. He got to, give us a list of all the people he wanted to see before he
Mm.
went. Um, he literally got to wrap it up perfectly. So actually, I was guilty that I felt neutral, if that makes sense. I felt like I should have this big reaction and I did all this essentially. I did all my anger in advance, essentially. I did all my, this is not fair, this is not fair. And my guilt bubbled up. And that in conversation with my therapist is that um you pre-grieved essentially. They call it oh, it just went out of my brain, but it's essentially pre-grieving. You're doing it all in advance, and you've essentially come to it. Always there, but all the action of it has just it's come. And now and now, that sort of level of, I'm a recovering Catholic, so I have guilt anyways. The guilt came from just not living up to the sort of movie style moment of, wailing and grieving.
I got you. I
Yeah.
got you. Wow. Wow. Okay. So is that something that you would go out on a limb and recommend?
Assistance in dying was the most professional, beautiful, well organized, but also to me, ethical experience I've ever been a part of. He got to first of all educate himself. That was the first step where it was, here's a whole bunch of information on what's involved in the process, and then he got to speak to, or he had to, it wasn't just he had to speak to, I believe it was three separate doctors, not just one. And it was a very clear, you know, it wasn't just like, are you sure you want to do this? It was like, if you don't want to do this, that's totally fine. We can back out right now. But also, if you don't want to do this, here are some treatment options you can try. And here's sort of how we would go down that road. And so it was not just a like, you have another option and that is to live. It's like you have another option and you have a bit of a plan to go with that option. Um, Now he tried to get talked out of by one nurse in particular. Apparently in the middle of the night, he said at about 3 in the morning, she came in and on sort of biblical grounds, had a very honest conversation, which, you're probably not supposed to do, but he was like, yeah, I appreciate her trying.
Yeah.
um, and then when it came to the actual day, it was, so the actual, like, sort of like when the buttons pressed to when it actually happened, I want to say it was about 3 or 4 days. It wasn't, overnight. He got to see all the people that he wanted to see. I sort of had to play the bouncer at the door. But he got to spend, really great quality time and say one last goodbye. And he told his brother he loved him for the first time that either of them can
Mm.
remember. Like it was just, it was perfect. Um, and then he got to choose the time and the place. And when that happened, he was sedated. He was in a very sort of, sleepy mood. Um, I know that they had a few more conversations with him. And then when it actually happened, it was, a handful of injections that do a whole bunch of different things. Whether it's one puts you to sleep, one, and he started snoring. Um, One stops the heart, and then the doctor's there and pronounces him dead. It literally just looked like he went to sleep. It was the most beautiful thing, And I can't imagine a better way for him to go because he was in so much pain and he was so unhappy. And he actually also was really pissed that this was happening. And he wanted to at least do it on his terms versus have the cancer win.
I really appreciate you taking that deep dive, and fielding that question. It's something that has come up a lot in certain circles, and something that certainly is being talked about right
Yeah,
now.
and
So,
it's weird. Like it seems like, it's very like strange in the sense that not it's not for everyone. Like again, I totally
right,
get that. But I will say that every step of the way felt thoughtful and professional and humane.
yeah, nice. Again, thanks for sharing that. I
Now, I will
appreciate it.
say there was a funny element, and it's not that funny, but the doctor that came to do the final thing literally walked off the tennis court beforehand and came in like short shorts and running shoes and a t-shirt. But he also had like a little plastic suitcase with him that apparently he had to go to the pharmacy to get. They put together the drugs, and he walked in with this black. And I just thought it was funny. He did not look like a doctor at all. He could have literally been anybody off the street that just happened to find the suitcase. Um, yeah, I'll never forget that part.
So we have determined he was a doctor, though, right? At this point.
He let's put it this way. He was able to inject him in the vein. I think that's good enough.
Okay. I mean, if you got the job done, I guess that's well, okay.
You or me could not figure it out right off the bat, could
Yeah,
we?
no, no, no. I can't stand putting needles in my arm at all. So I could never do
Oh,
it
and
to somebody
now that I
else.
think of it, maybe he was a junkie.
Just in off the street, happen to have the backpack with him. Yeah.
Hey,
Okay.
he knows veins.
Oh my goodness, Roger, I appreciate you sharing that in so many ways. Like I said before, our listenership is men. So I'm curious if you have maybe some advice for men who are dealing with this sort of thing, and not just with the death doula type of thing, but just with the grief, with the
Mhm.
stuff that happens afterwards, the aftermath, all of the masculine stuff that we get ourselves tied up in. Maybe the first one or two things that come to your mind, but what can you tell fathers and husbands out there about dealing with all this
Mm.
stuff?
Yeah, I think the first thing is talk. Um, Now talking can be everything from this is how I'm feeling and I need your love and support to have you ever, like asking questions like have you ever felt like this is a bit confusing or that? Talking can mean a whole bunch of things. The most important thing though is to not bottle it up and keep it inside. Now, I will also say though that if you feel like talking isn't something you want to do immediately, I also find writing is really helpful. Something to just sort of get it out of your get it out of your head and out of your stomach and all the places that tension lives and get it into something. Um, Talk the second thing is also really lean into the people around you for support and help. Um, it especially with men, it's often easy for us to say like, no, it's okay, we got this, or we don't need any help, or I can, you know, I can bring the kids with me to the hospital and we'll be fine. But it's like people around you want to help, and let them because that's their way of showing their love and support to you. But also, you could really use the help. And then finally, you're not alone in this. Like people are dying all the time, and some might say they're dying more than ever. You really can't escape it. You might as well, you might as well live with it and learn with it, but also understand that you're not alone in it.
Yeah. Great advice. I appreciate that. I do have one more question for you, but before we get to that last roundup question, I want to make sure everybody knows how to reach you and how to find the podcast and everything else. Give everybody your contact info.
Perfect. Yeah. Check out deaddadspodcast.com. We have the podcast both on YouTube. So check out Dead Dad's podcast on YouTube as well as Apple and Spotify. You can pretty much find us wherever you listen and enjoy your podcasts. But also the website is a really great resource. There's some great blog posts on there, but also different different resources, other sites, other phone lines, information lines in some cases. And then if anybody does ever want to be on the show, you can also reach out to us through the website. And we do have a message section where you can leave a voicemail. not just for us, but maybe you want to leave it for your dad, and that's something that we can play on the show.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, Roger, let me kind of hit you with our last wrap-up question then. And is there anything I didn't ask you? Is there anything that we talked about that you want to sort of double down on? Or, maybe you have a nugget or, one last piece of advice for our listeners that you want to leave behind. I'm going to give you the floor for the last minute or two and let you kind of wrap that up. Go for
I don't have anything. I feel like we have covered most of it. The only thing that I would say is that the idea of death and masculinity is, I think, it's really easy for us to bottle things up and not show that there's a little bit of a sort of chink in our armor. But that's only going to hurt you in the end. And if you can just talk about it and learn about it and ask questions and just be open and honest with yourself that you might need some support. I think it can just massively benefit you. Finally, laugh about it. It's okay to make a joke. It's okay to have a little bit of a laugh with that cry or exchange the funny stories. I'm pretty sure your dad would want that.
Nice. A great way to wrap us up. I appreciate that. I knew you would handle that perfectly. So I appreciate you very much. Folks, the co-host of the Dead Dads podcast, Roger Nairn. Roger, thank you for coming on, for being so open and for sharing your story. You were wonderful today. I appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Rick. Appreciate you.
All right, folks, it's been another awesome episode of the Power Man podcast. And the reason that we bring these powerful men on here with these incredibly powerful messages and we talk about these topics that we don't normally get to talk about is because we are all united in hoping that you can find your power so that you can become a better protector, better provider, better leader tomorrow than you are today, so that you can become a better husband, a better father, a better man tomorrow than you are today. And the reason that we want that for you is because you matter. It's because you have value and you're worth it. And at some point, you just have to believe it. Until next time.